Hello and welcome to Press TV's debate. I'm Marcia Hashimi. On July 14, 2015, Iran and the P5+1 group of countries signed the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA, in Geneva. There was optimism by some inside of Iran and other countries, and there was also others who said getting into an agreement in which the U.S. is a party to can never work because Washington is not trustworthy. U.S. Congress has just approved the extension of sanctions against Iran for 10 more years. Now, this after the International Nuclear Agency and other entities have reiterated that Iran has kept its part of the nuclear deal. What does it all mean for the nuclear deal? Stay with us as we take a look at all of this on this debate.
Calendar number 693, H.R. 6297, an act to reauthorize the Iran Sanctions Act of 1996.
Then on H.R. 6297, the yeas are 99, the nays are 0. The bill is passed.
The U.S. Senate's move to renew the Iran Sanctions Act for another 10 years has sparked strong criticism from Iranian officials. Iran's Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif called the decision a violation of the nuclear deal between Iran and the P5+1, saying it will only bring discredit on Washington.
The U.S. Congress move to pass anti-Iran sanctions will have no practical effect even if it is signed by Barack Obama. Meanwhile, it will bring discredit on Washington in the eyes of the international community as it has violated its commitments under the JCPOA.
A similar stance was taken by head of the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran, Ali Akbar Salehi, who played a key role in the completion of the 2015 nuclear deal with the P5+1. Meanwhile, a White House spokesman said U.S. President Barack Obama is expected to sign the bill, but added the sanctions extension is not necessary and won't interfere with the nuclear deal.
We believe the Iran Sanctions Act extension is not necessary, but we also believe it won't interfere with the Iran deal, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action that was agreed upon between Iran and the P5+1. So I would expect the president to sign this piece of legislation. As you know, inside that legislation, it includes a provision to allow the Secretary of State to waive relevant nuclear-related sanctions as consistent with both the legislation and our commitments made under the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action.
Experts say one of the biggest problems of the Iran Sanctions Act extension could come in 2024, when based on the JCPOA, the United States will be obligated to terminate rather than temporarily suspend sanctions against Iran. If the extension is signed into law, it will remain on the books until the end of 2026.
Unfortunately, I think this is a height of hypocrisy that the same members of Congress who are on record opposing the nuclear deal have now sponsored this bill for the 10-year extension of the Iran Sanction Act. On the other hand, President Obama himself, who just a few months ago was advising and trying to convince the members of Congress not to renew this act, has now flip-flopped and is about to sign it into law.
The leader of Iran's Islamic Revolution, Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei, referred to the same issue back in November. The leader said the experience of striking a nuclear agreement was a clear example of the enemy's untrustworthiness. Since Iran and the P5+1 reached their nuclear accord in July 2015, U.S. lawmakers, many of them lobbied by anti-Iran parties, have approved over a dozen bills against Tehran. The measures are aimed at hampering the implementation of the nuclear agreement. Many believe that with the approval of the Iran Sanctions Act in the Senate, Capitol Hill has stepped up its attempts to unravel the international accord.
I'd like to welcome my guests to the program from the Answer Coalition, Mr. Richard Becker out of San Francisco, and a member of the U.S. Congressional Defense Policy Advisor, Mr. Frederick Peterson out of Washington, D.C. Thank you both for being with us. I'd like to start this off with Mr. Peterson. Iran's president says that all P5+1 countries must fulfill their obligations. Do you think that the U.S. is reneging on its commitment to the agreement when it extends a decade more of sanctions?
Well, there is certainly a very strong argument that can and should be made for the integrity of international agreements and the word of a country extended to the world and to the partners of such agreements. However, it is highly questionable, if you notice, and your prelude news clip demonstrated, that this extension of sanctions, A, does not necessarily interfere with the agreement made, and B, was reached with the unanimous congressional input necessary and may well be signed by a president leaving office with mere weeks and a couple of months to go here. So the answer to your question directly is yes, agreements should have integrity and consistency over time, and they should be able to be maintained. However, when a bad agreement is found and negotiated into and made between countries and is rejected by the people of one of the parties, utterly rejected by the people of one of the parties, there should be some provision, and I think we can well expect the new administration to attempt to renegotiate the agreements made.
Okay.
And yet the sanctions that have just been extended do not necessarily conflict with that new agreement.
All right, stay with me, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Becker, your take on what Mr. Peterson just has said. Do you think that the U.S. has now violated the JCPOA? And as he said, that an entity that has signed an international agreement then should have the option, basically, the people should have an option of whether you're going to accept it or not. Your take on both these issues, sir?
Well, there's a very long history of the United States government violating treaties and agreements. One needs only ask the Native Americans, the indigenous people of this continent, with whom every single treaty, hundreds of treaties, were violated after they were solemnly signed. And this is certainly an act of bad faith on the part of the U.S. government. There's no lobby, there's no pro-Iran lobby of any significance in the United States. So the anti-Iran lobby dominates Congress the same way that the Israel lobby gets these same kind of 99-0 votes and unanimous votes or near unanimous votes and so forth. But I would say this is a very ominous development. You know, we know that Hillary Clinton, and we talked about her a great deal, the fact that she delighted in imposing what she called, and she bragged about this, crippling sanctions on Iran that caused a lot of suffering in Iran. So we knew that she was a warmonger, but unfortunately there were some who thought that Trump was going in a different direction. Well, now he's appointed person James Mad Dog Mattis, and he likes to call him, Trump likes to call him Mad Dog, as his Secretary of quote-unquote defense. I would say we should really call that what it is, the Secretary of War. And Mattis is highly critical of Iran, calls Iran the main source of instability and threat to peace in the entire Middle East. I mean, that's an amazing statement when you see the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda and these other groups and what they're doing. And it reflects and indicates the depth of hostility on the part of Mattis, and we have from Trump himself extreme criticism of the JCPOA and that it must be renegotiated and so forth. So this is all bad faith. I don't think that the Iranian government will accept this and will not go into a new negotiating posture or new negotiations with the United States. So really what you see is that the policy, both this vote, Obama signing this 10-year renewal of the sanctions, and the incoming administration as intentions as really posing a grave threat.
Okay. Well, Mr. Peterson, trying to understand, I think a lot of people probably would ask, why was the U.S. a signatory to this JCPOA to begin with? Because if ever since they have inked that agreement, there's been at least a dozen attempts to exert more pressure on Iran coming from within the United States. So what's going on here in your perspective?
Well, first of all, let me just quickly address in a prelude to response to your question. To call Hillary Clinton a warmonger, it is rather absurd. And to say that the Donald Trump administration was expected to be more moderate in coming in, and perhaps new agreements could be reached, apart from what the warmonger, in quotes, Hillary Clinton would negotiate, is really grossly misleading and utterly inaccurate.
I said some people expected. I said some people expected Trump to be less of a warmonger than Clinton. Those were my words.
And I would appreciate not being interrupted. Thank you. As far as the agreement, this agreement that was entered into rather hastily against a lot of better judgment that was being offered up in the Congress without an opportunity to modify or to contribute to it, and hastily put forward in order to have some wallpaper covering over an agreement between the two countries. My point is not necessarily that there should be an utter rejection of the conclusion of that treaty, nor even the direction of that treaty, but there must be, as the unanimous consent of Congress has recently indicated, input invited from all parties in the U.S. in order to reach an agreement that the United States is comfortable with, that has actual
Mr. Peterson, let me just jump in here. Is this another example, sir? Is this another example of American exceptionalism? What the United States must be comfortable with. When the United States was part of sitting down, 6 countries together, basically, and agreeing to this, everything is inked, and now the American people must be comfortable with it after these countries have sat down together and has signed this agreement to begin with. Isn't that just another example of American exceptionalism, sir? That basically you're saying the American people actually have more right than the other countries that were involved. When you're signing an international agreement, shouldn't it have some validation?
Well, to equate this with the term American exceptionalism, which is a term that applies in completely different context to this, the exceptionalism here is that this agreement was put forward without proper consultation and input from the American people. And if there is an exceptional characteristic of the United States as a representation of a government that represents the common will of the people, is that the people's will should have, in fact, been considered, and it was rejected in a hastily reached agreement.
Okay.
And that is quite evident because Democrats and Republicans have joined in that critique.
Okay, what about that, Mr. Becker? Stay with me, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Becker, what about that? It sounds like a domestic issue in general that is actually being brought now to the international front. And the other side of this is actually Iran's side, where, of course, there are many inside of this country today is saying that Iran should have never trusted the United States to begin with. And now on top of this, people like Mr. Frederick and others, of course, are saying now it's the American people's choice. It seems that that takes precedent over anyone and anything else in the world. Your take, sir.
Well, I think that that's a ridiculous assertion by Mr. Peterson, that the American people, if anything, don't want another war in the Middle East. The sentiment about that is very strong in the United States. And there's been a propaganda campaign, an anti-Iranian propaganda campaign that has been whipped up in the United States and particularly grips the halls of Congress. The agreement was reached after a long, arduous negotiating process in which Iran made extremely serious concessions, very serious concessions, as far as its nuclear program. And Iran said its nuclear program was not for nuclear weapons. The United States rejected that, but that's what the Iranian government said all along, and yet gave up a substantial part of its program in exchange for what was supposed to be an end to the sanctions regime. It has not been an end to the sanctions regime. There have been some sanctions lifted, but the international banks, which are key to international trade, have been very reluctant to enter into any kind of significant operations in regard to Iran because of their concern about what the next administration was going to do, given what Trump was saying all during the campaign, his extremely provocative statements and the provocative statements of those around him. So this idea that, somehow the United States has to be made comfortable, this is an example of American exceptionalism, that it raises the expectation for the United States is raised above everybody else. The United States has to be comfortable. The people of the United States have to be comfortable. What about the people of Iran? What about the people of the other countries engaged in these negotiations? What about the other people all over the world who are against seeing a new war? And the alternative to having a negotiated process was to head in the direction of a new war. And I think that would be, without question, disastrous for all.
Well, Mr. Peterson, what about that? I mean, even after signing the deal, besides the United States, because you said the American people have to be comfortable with it, the American government actually continued to exert pressure even on its European partners not to have commercial dealings with Iran. And of course, we know as far as with the international banking transfers, putting pressure on them. So what about that part of it? So the American people are not comfortable. Why was Washington, and still is, why is it putting pressure on the Europeans in this situation, the JCPOA? And when on the one hand, it was actually one of the signatories itself. So why did they sign if they didn't want this to actually happen to begin with?
Well, we should say, if we're to get back to the characterization of American exceptionalism as applying here, that the term is actually in some poetic context perhaps accurate, because the United States people are to be represented by their government, not individuals acting in reckless disregard of the will of Democrats and Republicans who have had significant misgivings about the course of the negotiations and the result of those negotiations,
well,
which
Mr. Peterson, I think the representation of the American government is definitely for another show. We don't have that many minutes right now left. And of course, after your U.S. election, with, of course, votes being more than the person who was actually elected, perhaps people would actually argue with that, what you're saying. But the question at hand right now, sir, is what I want to know. Was it all about Washington actually just trying to stop Iran's technological advances with its nuclear program? Because, of course, we do know that the International Nuclear Agency and others had said that Iran actually, in reality, had never violated the original deal. Iran was actually never after nuclear weapons with entities inside the U.S. said from the beginning with. So was this actually about trying to stop Iran's advancement from the nuclear technology side, or what's the deal?
Well, what it certainly was doing, I believe, what the proper direction of those negotiations were in the interests of the Iranian people, as well as the interests of their neighbors, because of a nuclear arms race. And I would quite emphatically, and critics of this agreement quite emphatically disagree with this as not enabling a nuclear weapons program. If Iran is to be the self-policing agent of its own violations of its own agreement, it renders that agreement rather absurd.
All right.
And that is the conclusion that many have reached, Democrats and Republicans, opposition as well as current government members. And I think we should very clearly look for a new negotiation to prevent the possibility of the spread of a nuclear arms race within that region.
Okay, Mr. Becker, I'm sorry, Mr. Peterson, I don't have a whole lot of time left. Mr. Becker, your take on that. I think it's absolutely amazing, actually, in general, with Washington actually trying to appear like the honest broker, especially when dealing with, as we know, as far as nuclear weapons or bomb, it has been the United States that has used the entities of mass destruction, and yet trying to punish the Islamic Republic of Iran, who has a non-warlike nuclear program, a civilian peaceful nuclear program, but continually trying to pressure Iran. Now what, in your perspective? Do you think that the JCPOA is dead, or still can it be resuscitated?
Well, I think this is a blow to the process. It's a blow to the JCPOA. And we have to keep in mind that the United States has nuclear weapons stationed very close to Iran. It was revealed a few years ago, I think a little bit inadvertently, that Trident submarines were sitting off the coast of Iran in the Persian Gulf. And there's, of course, also Israel, which has nuclear weapons, the close ally of the United States. The only nuclear weapons power in the Middle East, with the exception of the United States, which really is a nuclear weapons power in the Middle East. And so we have that reality contrasted with this propaganda campaign, this anti-Iran propaganda campaign. And Mr. Peterson is one of those who participates in that campaign, giving out these false accusations, demanding that even though Iran has made an agreement with very significant concessions by Iran, that it now must negotiate another agreement because there are some Democrats and Republicans who are unhappy with that one. I mean, talk about arrogance, talk about imperial arrogance. I don't think you can get much more arrogant than that.
All right. And on that note, I'm so sorry, but we're out of time. I appreciate both of you being with us. From the Answer Coalition, Mr. Richard Becker, out of San Francisco, and U.S. Congressional Defense Policy Advisor, Mr. Frederick Peterson, out of Washington, D.C. And as always, viewers, we appreciate you being with us right here in another debate. Make sure you join me right here, same time, same place tomorrow. I'm Marzia Hashemi. Goodbye.